couple more seconds. It's 12 o'clock. So let me go ahead and get started. I appreciate those of you who are showing up early and on time. So I want to give you a tip for the day. Every time I do this training, if I can think of a tip for the day to say thank you as a way to show up early and on time, I will. And so today's tip is from my friend Aristotle. And I mean, we're not close personal friends, but Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, it's a habit, right? And that ties directly into today's training that I want you to pay attention to, is that as we go forward, we can achieve the excellence on any level that we're looking for. If it's excellence in business development, excellence in running a company, excellence in capture, excellence in our helping small businesses, if we're on the outside helping in, right? Our excellence is a matter of habit. And today, in fact, I am going to be talking about habit in my third point in particular, and driving it home. And so I really want you to understand that. I heard somebody else say a great line too about failure is not who I am. It was just an event. So I've had multiple businesses, 5 businesses, and one I shut down immediately to start the GovCon chamber, but one failed because it was just a bad idea, and another failed because the whole .com era blew up. But that bad idea, right? It wasn't a reflection of me. It was just a reflection of that idea was a bad idea. That activity failed. I'm not a failure. That activity, that event is a failure. And it's the same thing on excellence. Excellence is not an act. I can't do one thing and I'm excellence. Excellence is a habit that I'll develop over time. And so keep that in mind as you move forward, maybe today and this week, is that Aristotle says we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. All right, let's go ahead and get rocking and rolling in the training. Let me turn off my captions. That was just a little thank you to those of you showing up early and on time. My sound, everything looks good. I appreciate it. Thanks for the feedback, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. So in this training, I want to help women-owned small businesses learn how you can make $1 million more in the federal market. Maybe your first $1 million, maybe your 10th $1 million. But in this training today, I just want to talk about how to make $1 million. There's no magic I'm going to share. There is no magic to making $1 million. It's just hard work, right? Doing the right thing the right way and enough of the right thing. If we do that over and over again, it's going to lead to excellence, right? And so don't come in here thinking you're going to see some magic trick on being able to make $1 million. I'm just going to tell you the basic process that if you follow it will lead to the success you're looking for. And the success today is about making $1 million. There's 3 main areas I want to talk about in today's training. The first thing is going to be having a focused offer. If you want to make $1 million as a woman-owned small business, you need to have a focused offering. Second thing I'm going to talk about is understanding your numbers and to see where that $1 million is coming from, how that's broken down. And then the third thing is determining the tasks that are needed to make $1 million. So we're going to cover those 3 things in today's training. I want you to keep in mind also that remember that there are 3 paths to making dollars in the federal government. Let me see if I show it really quick. But you can subcontract under a small business. The second path to federal revenue is you can prime contract with a federal agency. And the third path is you can subcontract under a large prime contractor. And the reason I mention this is that as you go forward and you're trying to make $1 million, you're following the process I'm going to lay out today. As you go forward, you can make money on one of those paths or all 3 of them. So it's dependent on what stage your business is in as you go forward. So if you plan and do the right things, you're going to be able to add $1 million to your company as a woman-owned small business, or frankly, any small business that follows this pattern should be able to add $1 million in. So put "let's do it" into the chat if you're ready for this training. If you're watching on replay, or if you're over on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, throw it in the comments. Just let me know that you're ready for the training by putting "let's do it" into the chat. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to my federal sales training, where I teach tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market. And since 2018, I've been teaching people, thousands of people like you, that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When you follow a process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results at the end. And that's what I want for you, is to have repeatable, predictable results. Today, around $1 million. Making $1 million repeatedly would be nice, right? Before we get started, do me a favor. If you haven't done this, put your company name and your core competency into the chat. 2 or 3 keywords into the chat. Help buyers remember who you are. Help me remember who you are, and help others in this community today. Even like I'm looking at somebody from Facebook in there, somebody from LinkedIn, and somebody from YouTube in here. Help these people know who you are. It's really important for us to share that. If you're open to connecting on LinkedIn and beginning to build a relationship through LinkedIn, put I'm open to connecting or just open to connecting into the chat. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into these 3 topics. I get 25 minutes to go through a lot of good information. I try to make it concise, but it tends to be a fire hose as it comes firing at you. If you got any questions, feel free to reach out and say, what'd you say here? And I'll try to get to it later, not during the training. So the first thing that a woman-owned small business needs to pay attention to if you want to make $1 million is you have to have a focused offering. Let's talk about what a focused offering is, right? A focused offering is just a clear and easy to understand description of your core competency. This is why I ask you in the beginning, put your core competency into the chat, 2 or 3 keywords into the chat that describe what your company does. And it needs to be clear and easy to understand. You can use just a few words as you go forward describing what your company does. And I'm going to expand on this in a minute, but you're trying to tell people what you sell, products or services. You're trying to say, here's what we sell in a couple of words. And there's 3 levels of communicating what do you sell when you're doing this. And so I just want to tell you and give you maybe a couple of examples. The first way is what I've been saying, right? Use 2 to 3 keywords that describe what you do. This could be phrases, by the way. When I say keywords, I don't mean a word. So an example of a great one that somebody might be on here is workforce development. That is 1 keyword. It's 2 words, 3 if you break up workforce, right? But if you keep it together like it belongs, it's 2 words, but it's 1 keyword. An example might be application development. Risk management framework is a keyword, right? And so having 2 or 3 keywords, key phrases, keywords to describe what you do makes it really easy to just say those 3 off the top of your head. The second level, the next level that you have is what I call a hook. We used to call this in the old days. It's 1 sentence that describes what your company does. So basically, you might weave those 3 keywords, 2 or 3 keywords, into a single sentence that describes what your company does. And I'll come back to that in a second. And then the last one is an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch is 3 to 4 sentences, but still it is describing your focused core offering, your focused offering in 3 to 4 sentences. You might think of it as a capability narrative. If you go into DSBS, that's a field there that says, answers the question, what do you do? Some people also put it basically on their homepage or their about. It's like, hey, here's what we do. Well, that should be basically your elevator pitch. The idea of an elevator pitch is that when you're riding up on an elevator going, 15 floors, 10, 15 floors or something, you need 3 or 4 sentences that you can get out, maybe a few more, but 3 or 4 long sentences that explain what your company does, especially as it might relate to the person you're riding the elevator with. That's the idea of an elevator pitch. Before you get on the elevator, though, you need a hook to get you invited onto the elevator. And I always feel like people don't talk about that because an elevator pitch is only good if they invite you on. You don't want to get onto an elevator and then force them to have to listen to your elevator pitch. It's better not to take the elevator ride with them if they don't like your hook. And your hook should be that 1 sentence that says, hey, we help small businesses succeed in the federal government by teaching them the processes to succeed. Something like that. It's like, no kidding, Neil. Come on the elevator. Tell me what else you do, right? We can help you in this way. And so you want to think about that. And so focused offering, just keep that in mind. A focused offering needs to be clear and easy to understand. And it begins with just having 2 or 3 keywords that describe that. When you think about a focused offering and why it is important, it's really important to keep in mind the why behind all of this advice I give you or the advice you get from anybody. The why behind a focused offering, the first thing is it just makes it easy for you to communicate. The more you know your keywords, the more you can say ba-boom, ba-bing, ba-bang, right? Or whatever way that is. The second thing is it makes it easier to say the sentence. Government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. I have landed on that line because I really like it because it really explains what I do for you. Government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. I teach you how to follow that process to lead to $1 million, for example, right? And so you want it to be easy for you to communicate, which then allows it to be easy for everybody on your team to also communicate that exact same message about your core offering. The second reason you want to keep in mind on why having a focused offering is important is because it makes it easy for others to repeat. So if I tell somebody in Department of Education when I meet them that, hey, we're a Microsoft SharePoint company focused on SharePoint migrations and SharePoint application development or something. If I'm able to say something that they can get in their mind, then it makes it easier for them to repeat. But if I say that I do all sorts of stuff, it makes it hard for them to remember and repeat. This is why, for example, I always say be very slow with your name. Make it easy for somebody to remember your name. Not all of us can instantly hear a name and remember it, but if you take the time to make sure I understand your name, and don't hold it against me if it takes me a couple of seconds or times to get it, I can begin to remember your name, which makes me more comfortable talking to you. Well, it's the same thing with what you offer. If what you offer is easy to understand, I'm going to go forward and remember it, and I can repeat it to others, which leads me to my third why, which is it makes it easier for you to get in the door. If you have a clear offering, a focused offering of what you sell, it makes it so much easier for you to get into an agency door or to work with teammates, because they pretty much instantly know what you sell and they can introduce you to other people, etc. I want you to consider, if this is you, consider moving from a FOMO, change your FOMO mindset, this fear of missing out that I have to say I do all these things. Instead, I want you to get rid of that FOMO idea and come down on a focused offering, and think of that focused offering as a beachhead mindset, right? So change your FOMO mindset to a beachhead mindset. A beachhead mindset is you take your focused offering and you get on the beach, you get started in an agency. And then as you get in, behind you are other offerings that you might be able to offer. But the very focused tip of the spear offer that you have is what you're best at and what's easy for everybody to understand. Because once you're in the door, now you're moving forward with not just your offering, but with proven experience with that agency that you're trying to get into. So focused offerings will really make it so much easier to get into the door. Put that into the chat, focused offering. If you understand what I'm saying about the first step to making $1 million as a woman-owned small business is make sure you have a focused offering. So focused offering into the chat. The next thing I want to talk to you about on what's important to keep in mind as you drive towards $1 million as a woman-owned small business is you need to understand your numbers, right? I say $1 million, but what does that mean? My biggest video out there on YouTube is something like how to make $10 million. And I'd be willing to bet that 80% of the people who have watched it haven't made their first $100,000. And so it always disappoints me that that's my biggest video. I wish people would watch my how-to videos, the ones that are much more simple steps to succeeding moving forward. But one of the simplest things you can do making $10 million or like today, $1 million is to understand your numbers, beginning with how are you going to get $1 million? What does that even mean, right? I say it, but is that one sale? You go out, you land $1 million contract, poof, done, I'm good. Or is that multiple? Well, today I'm definitely going to be talking about how to get $1 million from multiple sales, multiple wins. And I want you to be conservative in your thinking, right? Don't be overly optimistic and say, hey, I'm just going to go out there, make one phone call, have one opportunity and get $1 million. Yes, that sounds cool. I'd love that too, but that's not realistic. And most importantly, that's not eliminating risk. That's putting all the risk on that one success. But if you back it up and you have multiple ways of reaching that $1 million, then you're going to reach that $1 million. And even if one thing falls, the other activity you're doing is going to achieve it. So I'll talk about that in a second. So one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm working with a customer who has, for them, they have a $2 million goal, pretty aggressive goal, pretty fast. They want to make $2 million. And what I'm talking to you about is exactly what they're paying me to do for them. And what I do for other customers is laying out the process for going after whatever the goal is, and then breaking it down. I call it reverse engineering, but breaking down the tasks that are needed. So I know all the little tasks that will lead to that big goal that I have of $1 million, right? And so for you, I want you to think about your numbers. And I'm going to walk through, just you and me will talk about it for a second, but I want you to think about what your average sales size is. And I'm primarily in the professional services, but you can do this in the construction world, and you can do this in the product sales even. But think about this. I ask this every time I talk to a customer. One of the first questions I ask them about when I'm learning about their business is, well, what's an average sale for you? If you're in construction, maybe they're making $50,000 is kind of average. I'd love these bigger ones, but average is 50,000. It's like, okay, for services, for all of us in services, we generally have an average sales size of an FTE, a full-time equivalent. So I say, what's your average hourly rate? And today, let's use a really conservative number of $50, right? If you say $50 an hour, then that person is going to be bringing in $100,000 in revenue to your company. Just really straightforward, right? If you don't know this already, there's 52 weeks in a year. There's 40 hours we typically work in a week. 52 times 40 is 2,080 hours. We generally have 2 weeks of vacation, sometimes more, but generally 2 weeks of vacation. So we take 80 hours off, and you get 2,000 hours that the average person might be billable. And so that, if you just multiply it, right? Some companies, it's a little different. They offer more vacation. I don't really care. I like easy math, right? So $50 an hour is $100,000 in revenue. $100 an hour average rate is $200,000. And the reason this is important, because as it works towards the $1 million, if I'm saying that the average sale, the average person I put on contract somewhere is worth $100,000 in revenue to me, then I need 10 of these people being billable in order for me to make $1 million. So as soon as I get 10 people billable, I'm going to make $1 million. If you're like me, your rates are higher. And so, all of my companies, I've never had anything less than $100 an hour, and it was all higher. So if I say $100 an hour, that's $200,000 revenue from one person in my company billing out to the government, right? And so that means I need 5 of those people to make $1 million. I want you to do that math in your own head. What's the average sales size I have? And then divide that into the $1 million, and you'll have the number of sales you need. It's really that simple. We sometimes overcomplicate the simple, but if all you know is your average sales size, you're going to be able to know what it takes to get to $1 million. And so if I use my example of saying $50 an hour is $100,000 in revenue, meaning I need 10 people billing at that in order to make $1 million, then what I need to do is to find 10 strategic partners. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's 3 paths to making $1 million in the federal space. But for now, I want to talk about just subcontracting under small or large, right? But not prime contracting. I have a separate video that lays out all the numbers. I've got a whole handout of how you can populate your numbers for what amount of opportunity value you need in the pipeline, et cetera. You can find another video on that. But for today, let's focus on subcontracting. And in order to get subcontracting, I need to find what I call strategic partners. And strategic partners basically are ones who are willing to work with you. If they're willing to work with you, then they're a strategic partner. And it's our job to build that up to a really great relationship. And so as I look at strategic partners, one bit of guidance, and then I'm going to go into the how do I do the activity on a regular basis. But one of the things that I do for strategic partners in the determining who am I going to go after, I look for companies that have the ability where I might be able to get 5 or 10 positions in their company every year. That means for large, that's easy. Any large, that'll work. But for small businesses, it typically means I'm going to be looking for companies that are 10 million and higher. If they're 10 million and higher, then there's a potential, then my relationship will eventually lead to 10 bodies or 10 FTEs that I can get with that relationship, with that company as a subcontractor. It does not mean I won't work with smaller companies. It just means in this activity, when I'm going to $1 million, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to companies that are making $1 million because there might not be a lot of room and they need all the revenue themselves. But when you're bigger than 10 million, you're solidly into teaming. You're solidly open to subcontracting because you know you can't go to 20 or 50 million without subcontracting and teaming. And so that's why I look for companies like that. You can go into all the tools that are out there to be able to find these companies. And I talk obviously a lot about this in my training, but keep that in mind as I'm going forward. I'm looking for companies that are, let's say, 10 million and higher, but most importantly, that I could see being able to get 5 or 10 positions each year, not just one time, but each year as they're growing. And as I'm working with them, I could see being able to have 5 or 10 positions in there. And again, like I said, if you're at the stage in your company that you can work with larges, then larges have the ability to do that at 50 or 100 people a year. So there's a lot of potential for growth. So I'm looking at 10 people, and I've just determined, I'm just looking at my numbers and I'm saying, okay, I need to find 10 companies in order to find 10 people that'll be billing out at $50 an hour, my average rate. That's how I'm going to get to $1 million. And so I'm going to go into the tasks in a minute. But if you understand the value of knowing your numbers, if you're going to actually know your numbers, know your numbers in the chat. Let me know that you're going to sit there and take the time to understand those 3 basic numbers, right? What's my average sale? And how many sales do I need to reach $1 million? And then the third number is that $1 million that I'm going to go after. So that's understanding your numbers. And let me go into this third step. I just had one complete drop of water. I don't know why I had an empty glass sitting there. Okay, so the third step here is determining your tasks. I talked about having a focused offering, and then after the focused offering, you want to understand your numbers. Should take you just an hour or less, 20 minutes or less kind of thing. The third thing I want you to pay attention to is determining the tasks that are necessary. There's this great line out there that I used to love, that 90% of success is showing up, right? But we do need to plan the other 10%. And this determining your tasks, let's call this the 10%. If you just show up to your desk and pick up the phone, that's showing up. Now, what's the activity that you got to do? How much do you need to get done in order to achieve the $1 million? Because it's one thing to know your numbers and know that, hey, here's my average sale, and that's how much I need to win each time or get each time. But what activity is necessary? Going back to the right activity, the right way, and enough of the right activity. I want to talk about daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. And I want to remind you what I said at the beginning is there's no magic in what I'm teaching you. There's just hard work. It's just a process and hard work. And so the first thing and the most important thing you need to pay attention to, if you want to make $1 million as a woman-owned small business, you need to make 20 calls, 20 cold calls, new calls every single day. This task should take less than an hour. You're picking up the phone, you're calling somebody and saying, hey, Jane, my name's Neil McDonnell from ITRUS, and we do SharePoint services, and I wanted to find out if there was any synergy between us in the federal market. Do you have time for an introduction call? Can we schedule an introduction call? Right? That wasn't my best delivery of that. But my point is you pick up the phone and you call them, and that's what you say. I'm scheduling a call. You do 20 of those where every day you're trying to schedule an introduction call. And the idea behind this is you're going to meet the people who will begin to become your strategic partners, right? If you do a targeted approach where you're focusing on just the right people to call, then you're going to understand that these people they fit into your world. They're not construction if you're IT. They're not really small. So they're looking for a company like yours. You just got to call enough people. So giving you the numbers, just so you understand this, if you call 20 people a day, and this literally is less than 1 hour. If you call 20 people a day, then you will be calling 100 people per week. You will be calling on average 400 people per month. And in 1 year, in one 12-month span, you will have called 5,200 new people. Now, actually, I realize this as I say it, that I left the weekends in, but it doesn't matter because you don't need to call 5,200 people. At some point, as you're calling 20 people a day, you're going to get to this stage where you're finding and building the relationships with the companies that will lead you to that $1 million goal. You just need to start off with a huge effort of picking up the phone and calling. If you've heard me talk about this before during this Women-Owned Small Business Month that we're focusing on in our training, we talk about this as one of the biggest failures is that we don't just pick up the phone and call people. But if you make these calls, it'll take you less than 1 hour. So that's one task that I'm recommending you put into your activity, that you pick up the phone and call these people. And the reason you're actually setting calls at weekly, monthly base and you're setting those numbers is because you should look and measure yourself every week, every day, every week, every month, right? You should be looking at yourself because there's no way you're going to hit your goal if you say to yourself, I need to call 20 people a day, but you get to the end of the week and you've called 30 people total. And then it gets to the next week and you've called, maybe 40 people and 10 people the next week and 100 the next week, but then you're still far less than 400 that you expected in that month. You need to be seeing your performance against plan. Basically, you're planning out 20 calls a day or 100 calls a week. You want to see how you're doing on there and make sure you're always hitting that number. It's the simplest thing that you can be doing, but sometimes it's the hardest thing for us to do. We call it quadrant 2, by the way. If you understand Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, he describes a time matrix and where we spend our time. And quadrant 2 is the time we spend the least in. And that quadrant is important tasks, but not urgent. And because they're not urgent, the urgent tasks tend to grab all our time. But we've got to block that 1 hour a day out, for example, and make those calls. And the people on your team, et cetera. So anyways, that's one task that you need to pay attention to when you're determining the task. There's 2 others I want you to pay attention to just to keep them in mind. The second one is every week you need to find 2 new opportunities that can go into your pipeline. These opportunities can be prime contracts. These opportunities can be subcontracts. It doesn't matter. You need to put the time in to be able to find those. Theoretically, this should take less than 1 hour a week. But if you're doing that, you're constantly feeding your pipeline so that you can achieve the next goal that I'm going to talk about is 4 proposals sent out a month. Again, these don't have to be prime contract proposals that you're writing, which is the big effort. These could be little teeny ones. These could be ones where you subcontract with somebody, right? I'm not talking about bidding. I'm primarily talking about proposals. And so literally you're working on them and writing them, but you need to be able to find opportunities in order to write proposals. You have to write proposals in order to win contracts. In fact, if you haven't seen this 7-step process, let me put it up here. The 7-step process is literally what I'm describing, right? You're targeting, you're finding all those people you're going to call, and then you're reaching out to them, picking up the phone and saying, hey, can we have an introduction meeting, which will lead to strategic relationships that once you have them, you'll be able to identify opportunities. Most importantly, for subcontracting, you'll be able to identify opportunities that might even be on contracts that were awarded already. They haven't filled all of the positions, et cetera. But that comes from having relationships, not just people knowing who you are and you know who they are, but trust. Relationships imply trust, right? And then from those opportunities, you'll be able to write proposals and be on proposals and lead to sales. The process is not magic. I designed that 7-step process on purpose because it is so simple to follow. And it's the same thing for us here. When we think about determining your tasks, the 3 tasks I want you to remember that are all part of that 7-step process are daily making 20 calls, weekly finding 2 new opportunities to add to your pipeline, and monthly writing 4 proposals, being part of 4 proposals going out the door. If you do that, it'll be impossible for you not to make $1 million, let alone your additional goals. Because along the way, if you're not getting the traction, then you'll seek a little bit of advice on how to tweak your phone call, how to tweak your proposal, how to identify better opportunities. But as long as you keep showing up and doing those 3 main tasks, they will lead to the sales you're looking for. In particular, for a woman-owned small business, they will lead to that $1 million that I'm talking about today. So just a reminder, the best answers are the simplest answers. And that's why I talk and teach the way I do. If you want to make $1 million as a woman-owned small business, then have focused offerings, right? Understand your numbers and what it takes to reach the goal that you have set for yourself. And then the last one is determine and follow the tasks that are needed to reach that $1 million goal, as an example. Hey, I wanted to say thank you to the GovCon Chamber of Commerce sustaining members. We don't take any federal dollars and we don't take any large prime sponsorships. Sustaining members like you make this training possible for all small businesses out there. And so if you're not a sustaining member, please consider becoming one. And remember, government contracting, it is not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.